Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Story. I'm blessed to have the attendance of one of my favorite professors. She has been a reference for me for master's programs and kind of a David Parker cheerleader for quite some time, Dr. Janet Epp Buckingham. She is the director of the Laurentian Leadership Centre, which is a satellite campus of Trinity Western University in Ottawa. It was one of the best semesters of my life, being able to go there, and she was the director at the time and still is. I like to say that the LLC is the unknown superpower in Ottawa, or at least it was back in the Harper days. A little less so with the Liberals being in power, but still a force to be reckoned with. So welcome to the show, Dr. Buckingham.
Thank you. It is great to join you today.
So, as we do with every guest, I'd like to know what you love about this country.
There are so many things that I love about Canada. So let me take you back to my great grandparents who came to Canada from Ukraine. They were Mennonites, and there have been many Mennonites who followed this path who were in Ukraine. They were starting to face pressure for practicing their faith in that part of the world, and Canada welcomed those Mennonites to come to Canada, promised them the ability to live with freedom, to practice their beliefs, to make a better life for themselves here. And I think Canada still does that. It promises people the opportunity to make their way in the world, to improve their lot in life. And Canada is a country of our First Nations and immigrants and descendants from immigrants. And I think we're always a country that's looking to the future, looking to be better, looking to make changes. It's a place where innovation is rewarded, and people with a vision have all kinds of opportunities and possibilities.
It is quite fascinating, how much opportunity there is, and sometimes I think we forget that. But I was just in an Uber on the way to the studio, and there was this wonderful Nigerian man that had picked me up the last time I went to the studio. So this was our second trip together, right? And we just get talking, and every time we're just both blown away by what an amazing country this is. And the way he puts it, it warmed my heart. He was like, David, we just want the opportunity to even come here. That's how great it is here. If we're even given the chance to come in, we're going to come in for sure. We love this place. And I can't think of a better thing that can be said about a country than even our Conservative Party is pro-immigration.
Absolutely. And I think all the political parties see the value that new immigrants bring, because they come because they want to. You know, they are choosing to come here. They're wanting to take advantage of the opportunities that Canada provides. And so having immigrants is always providing a source of fresh new ideas. And Canada is kind of isolated. We don't have borders with many, many countries. We have border with one country.
Yeah. How many countries can say that?
Yeah. So, to get fresh ideas and newness, it is really great to have an influx of the global diversity. And the global diversity brings new ways of doing things and new ideas and
new food,
and a fresh approach, and great
food. Yes,
I think about that every now and then. Now, my husband and I are both foodies, and we love trying new things. And I was thinking back to the way I grew up. Oh my, meatloaf and tuna casserole. We have come a long way.
We've come a long way. We really have. I mean, I was the same way. No, I still love the good old, prairie meat and potatoes and vegetables. Like, it's my favorite meal still. But I will say, I love to have Indian food. I love sushi. The different cuisines of the world. You can even get them in Red Deer, Alberta. That's what Canada is, right? I was up in Prince George. Yeah, no, sorry, Fort St. John. I was up in Fort St. John for a campaign, and and half of the campaign was like Filipino and East Indian, right? And you think way up here in the far North Tundra, of course, because people are people, right? It doesn't matter. And doing this podcast has taught me something that I think I knew it intellectually, but now I know it emotionally, which is nobody loves this country like immigrants do. They love this place, right? And it's great. I love having them there. One of the things I wanted to talk about on this podcast is generational shifts. You spend a lot of time with the up and coming generation, and you and I've had conversations in person and just one-on-one about how you get to watch the zeitgeist live, because every semester you get the freshest iteration of the zeitgeist. So can you share with the listeners a little bit about some of the insights you have from that unique position?
It is really great to have this window always into students that are about to graduate from university. They're about to enter the real world of work.
They have no idea what they're getting into.
They have no idea what they're getting into. They're really good at education. They have spent their entire lives going to school, going to university. September comes, you go back to school, wherever that may be, and that's their lives. And like this idea of you write a paper, you hand it into a professor, you get marked, and that's it. And all of a sudden, they come to this program. My program at the Laurentian Leadership Centre involves a half-time internship, and students take 3 courses. So they're doing both. The courses are supposed to apply to the kind of internship work they're doing, and then they learn the value of ongoing education even when you enter the world of work. And it's a huge surprise when they hand in a piece of work and it gets circulated around the office and it gets edited and it comes back with red pen all over it, and then it gets finished.
And they're devastated, right? They're devastated.
They're devastated. and then they have to revise it 6 times before somebody signs off on it ultimately. And then it goes on a website and everybody sees it. And this is a very stressful, shocking experience. But after the first time that happens, it's kind of exciting to know that the work that you're going to do in the future is going to actually go out beyond a teacher or a professor. And students start to see the world of work in a different way. But I've been in this role for 15 years.
Yeah.
And when I started, we were barely out of dial-up internet. A lot of students came to this program who didn't have their own computers, who didn't have their own cell phones. And so I've seen the shift to smartphones, to we don't have TVs in the building anymore because who would watch them?
Yeah.
Unless you could cast to them from your phone. So there have been a lot of technology changes that I've seen, but also seen a real difference in, move from millennials to Gen Zs. And Gen Zs have just grown up with technology. A lot of them, well, actually, maybe none of them know or experienced 9/11.
Right. Imagine, let's to go on that for a moment. Like, imagine people, they don't even remember that, right? Yeah. They don't remember. That was like the event of our lives, or my life. That was the event, the defining international moment.
Yes. Where most students in university now were born 2000 or later. So if they were alive at the time of 9/11, they were much too young watching it and experiencing it.
Yeah.
So for them, this pandemic is the first really big thing in their lives that is shaping them, and it's shaping them in some very interesting ways. I think, like many of us, it's building some resilience and some adaptability into them, but probably at a younger age that they aren't as conscious of it as people who are older.
Right. Yep.
The music they listen to is different.
What is it?
It's a lot of my music.
Oh, really?
I'm at the tail end of the boomers, and I'm constantly hearing like music that I grew up with playing here in the kitchen.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of throwback music. Different ways of, I find they tend to appreciate a flat org chart.
That would make sense. Yep.
Don't have the same attitudes to people in authority. It's interesting because I find that millennials tend to not necessarily like Gen Zs.
There seems to be a bit of it's almost like a condescension. It's like, oh, you're just you don't know what it's like not to have the internet and the smartphone, right? We're already the old grumpy men saying, "Oh, kids these days."
Kids these days, exactly. But I find that they're very, very much engaged with the idea of how to make the world a better place. There a lot of my students have already done a year overseas doing international development, or working overseas for a year. They really take advantage of international opportunities. Many of them speak more than one language, which is great.
Yes.
In the globalized world that we live in. So, and I find they have a very large comfort level with technology and ways of using it well. And I think, post-COVID, we've talked about so many changes that we're anticipating. There's been an acceleration of change in the world.
Yep.
And largely that we're going to be using technology more and more. And I think the Gen Zs are very, very well placed to take advantage of opportunities that technology will give to us.
So you had how many classes of millennials? 5, 6, 7, 8 classes of millennials?
Oh, at least.
Right, because you have 2 a year, so it'd be way more than that.
Yeah, when there's a generational shift, it always takes a few years.
Right. What are those bridge generation like? Like, what's the bridge generation between the millennials and Gen Z like?
They're quite interesting because a lot of them are, they're technologically savvy. They are kind of the people who would have experienced 9/11, but at a very young age. And so they tend to actually have a lot of anxiety.
Interesting.
I had about 3 or 4 years where a lot of students that experienced a lot of anxiety, and I think it's because they experienced 9/11 in kindergarten.
A very formative time.
1.
It's like the world has become a dangerous place suddenly.
At an age that the world should not become a dangerous place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I do. I think that group of students, as they have now gone out into the work world, will continue to experience things in a way that they will always experience a higher level of anxiety.
Yeah, it's kind of in their DNA now. It's interesting because I remember you telling me about when you watched the transition between people who only texted and people who used the phone. Do you want to share with the listeners? I thought that was so profound when you said it, and just so insightful into the zeitgeist shift.
Totally. So my students now, it's actually a skill they have to learn to use the phone. Because they have grown up without really using phones. Some of them do have some phone skills. I could probably get rid of I have a landline in my office. I could probably get rid of it. It rings about once every couple of months.
Right.
Nobody phones. And even now, if people want to talk, they'll probably set up a Zoom call.
Yeah.
But I remember when it started to be something where I would get an email or text asking to have an appointment to telephone.
Right.
Like, it used to be you would telephone somebody to get an appointment to do something else.
Right.
Yeah. So everybody moved to texting. And now I would say that a lot of people have moved beyond texting to various kinds of apps. So then it's a question of, do I Facebook Messenger or do I WhatsApp you? And email is, email. I'm actually teaching a class in email skills tomorrow.
Yeah, because they don't have it.
Yeah, they don't have phone skills. They don't have email skills. And so so just the way that people communicate has really changed. And I always feel like I'm playing a little bit of catch up because my students only come for one semester. So as soon as I'm kind of like, I'm always getting like the cutting edge of things.
Yes.
And so I'm like when TikTok came on, I'm like, oh, okay.
Okay, so this has become a thing.
This is a thing, and I now need to understand the trends. And,
Yep.
At least understand the lingo of what people are talking about when they're, raising various things with me. But I do know that there are a lot of people who you move into a certain era of life and you stop wanting to engage with new technology.
Yep.
And I just really encourage people to try to stay even a little bit current with that, because you'll find that you will be able to connect with multiple generations a lot better if you have a broader array of ways of communicating with people.
Do you find that the change in the communication styles has changed in the way that people think?
I'm sure that it does. I
mean, you're seeing these papers come in, right? And these students are so you like you're on the front lines of developing brains, right? And you're watching like how they process information. Are you seeing a shift in how information is even being presented? Because I can't help but think. I mean, Elon Musk talks about this a lot, right? He's like, we're thinking at the speed of our thumbs. That is a really slow speed, right? Like, typing is faster and talking is even faster. And I think we're getting away from that. Like the pendulum has swung back, and podcasts are huge now. I mean, people are sitting and listening to this 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast without blinking, right? And that's a lot of information, way more than you could possibly read in that same amount of time. So, but do you notice a change in thinking? This is something Matt Enns, who was also an LLC alumni, and I talk about a fair bit. But he really believes that we don't even remember things the same way. Now we remember where to find things.
That's absolutely true. We remember how to find things. We don't necessarily remember the thing itself. And, to be fair, there is way more information than we can ever remember. And There's more information being created at such a rapid rate, we can't possibly manage it all. So, I mean, I'm even teaching different skills now, aside from teaching email skills, which are sort of the dinosaur skills. I'm also teaching some more front-end skills. I know that people get most of their information through the internet. So how do you determine
what's real and what's
source? Is it not a credible source? I also realized at a certain point, my students didn't seem to retain anything from the readings that they're supposed to have done. So, being an old-fashioned professor, I would accuse them of, hey, nobody's doing their readings. And they're like, we all did them. We did our readings. And then I realized, okay, you read a page and then you went to your phone and you looked at 3 texts, maybe, the latest viral video, and then you come back and you read the next page. So the people read, but they're not retaining
No focus.
So there are all kinds of other ways of teaching and communicating information. So I started to say, okay, if you don't want to read about this, then, here is a TED Talk about it. Here is a video on this. Here is a debate on this particular subject.
Right.
So I do find that when students have a variety of resources that they can get information from, they're more likely to get something from one of those kinds of sources. But I'm getting a huge amount of creativity. If I let my students go with creativity for their assignments, so I'm teaching a course in the Prime Ministers, and one of my students was doing a presentation on William Lyon Mackenzie King. Now, King is very well known to have written a diary.
Yes.
And his diary is really quite something.
It's quite salacious.
It's quite salacious. But it has all kinds of interesting information, and it's all online. And so my student decided that she was going to do, what if he was doing this now? Well, it would all be on Instagram.
Right,
so
right.
she created this whole Instagram.
Oh, wow. With all this information.
With all this information.
Oh, that's incredible. Is it on Instagram?
Fabulous.
Right now?
I had another student who did a video that was a riff on another video series of, how you get information that he did on Paul Martin. And it's like, I'm getting this level of creativity unleashed that actually can create resources for future students.
Yeah, I love that. That is smart. And I will say this, I have a number, I'd say, well, like in campaigns, you're always training the young as well. It's different. It's more of a, skill. You're training like a trade, right? More of a trade than it is in learning how to think. But I have noticed that they are incredibly creative. This next generation coming up, because they're always messing around with creative things like, oh, I'll take a picture of this, and then I'm going to make it look like this, and then I'll write this with the picture. Like something that I would love to talk about with you that I'm sure you've thought about is memes. Memes have taught me more about the world in the last 3 years than I think any other thing, because it's made me realize people don't think in words. They think in symbols. I mean, words are symbols, and that's what everyone says to me. But I'm like, no, it's more than that. They think in ideas, in ideas that are both emotion and fact married to one another. That is the memes. That's a meme, right? Because what is a meme? It's a shared experience, right? So if you do a Lord of the Rings meme, everybody who's seen Lord of the Rings knows what you're talking about. There's layers to it, right? And this generation understands that in a way that I don't think any other generation ever has before, because memes are just how they talk.
Yeah, and Marshall McLuhan famously said the medium is the message, and we're really, really seeing that now, and so as you and Matt have talked about how it's changing brains, it definitely is. Like literally, your brain gets wired in certain ways, and your brain gets wired to learn from memes and to remember memes.
Right.
Quite honestly, they're usually much more memorable than reading a text, like a long piece of work. So, it's like, yeah, I mean, if that's the way you're learning about stuff, although, like Twitter, it does reduce down everything to very small bits of information and doesn't tend to give a lot of context. So one of the things I try to get across to my students is it's complicated. And if you think you've got an easy answer, you're not getting the whole picture. So dig a bit deeper. And
There's nuance. There's nuance.
With that, don't be satisfied with the meme-sized answer to something.
And I think I want to go deeper to that point, because I think that's a really important point. Is I think that's why we've got to where we are right now, as people are taking the easy answer to things, and so we're not as bad in Canada, but like what's going on in America, and I tend not to talk very much about America on here, but as far as I can tell, it is basically two sides truly believing that there's a simple answer to everything when there's never a simple answer to anything.
Absolutely. Anything that you do has consequences that you don't foresee. And I think we've seen that during COVID that, yes, oh my goodness, we have to save people. We'll just shut everything down. It's like, yes, when you shut everything down, it has huge consequences for mental health, for students' education, for the economy. And so how do you deal with all of these other things that are the consequence of your, oh my goodness, we have to do this right now?
Yeah, no, exactly. What I want to go back to what you were saying about focus, because I think that's one of the things that I didn't learn it was important. I think I had the capacity to focus, but I just didn't understand how powerful focus is. How have you seen focus play a role in not just your students' lives, but your own life?
Well, we've talked in our family a lot about flow and how that's when you get your most creative times and when you have these flow moments. And it's when you can focus in on something for like 3 hours and it feels like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's different for different people how you can get into that. For me, I'm an academic. I can get into it in intellectual ideas and debates. But some people will get into a flow moment when they're doing something super creative. It can be drawing, it can be art, it can be music, it can be cooking, creating something. And when you experience that flow, you then start to be able to understand how you can try to apply it in other areas of your life. And try and say, okay, if I'm going to think more deeply about this, I have to be able to get into that kind of flow where I'm completely focused on what I'm doing. But we have so many distractions in our society, like even, we're sitting on a Zoom call right now. We can see each other. Both of us have other stuff going on
around us. Exactly. I've got this dog that's being horrible, but
you have a dog.
Yeah.
You probably have your phone in proximity somewhere. I managed to close my email before we started because otherwise,
then it would just bing, bing, bing.
You got notifications popping up. But in your normal life, you've got several applications open on different devices. And, so even when you don't have people or dogs distracting you, you have all of these different things that are distracting you. So to actually reduce down all of those things that distract you to try to focus in on something that is important, it's just hugely challenging. And sometimes you just have to, I'm gonna shut down everything else so that I really can and do focus in on this one thing that's super important that I really need to put my mind and my heart and my soul into it.
And when you do that, what do you think the result ends up being? I have my own theories, but I want to hear yours before I share mine.
Well, I think that having focus on something is hugely important because, first of all of those other things that go by you in a day, you don't remember any of them.
No.
So having the focus is the times when you're really going to, I'm going to get my mind into a particular framework where I'm going to remember something. I'm going to I usually progress in my thinking on it or my skill level on it, my abilities on it, but it pushes you into like a forward motion and you can make progress on things that otherwise it's like, yeah, I saw that, I read that. How often do you read a text or an email, but you haven't actually read to the end?
Yeah.
And you didn't really see that somebody asked for, I need to know this by this time because you weren't focused on it.
Yeah. And I that's attention. I believe that the most powerful thing in the world is attention. And it's not just your own attention to things, but it's also people's attention to you. And the way that I describe this is Elon Musk never ran a quote unquote traditionally good company. but he did one thing perfectly. He got attention. And he got so much attention and so much belief that built up that he manifested a real company, right? And people are like, oh, you use the word manifesting. Like, what do you mean? Do you think it's some kind of magic? I'm like, humans manifest houses all the time. They say, I'm going to build a house here. And then they do every of the 1,000 little tasks it takes to build a house, and they just do it. And we act like it's the most natural thing in the world. Animals don't do that. Maybe they make nests, right? But like that's what we do. And the only way you can manifest a house is by a lot of concentrated focus and attention.
Yep. And you have to have a vision for where you want to get to.
Yes. You have to have a goal. It's like Jordan Peterson, right? It's like you have to have a heaven to go towards and a hell to run from.
Yeah, but I talk to my students about leadership, and I say, the first thing you have to do is have self-leadership. You have to figure out where you want to go and then orient yourself to getting there. And then you can do it with other people and say, okay, let's keep with the house example of, we're going to build a house here. Well, very few people build a house by themselves. There are some people who do that.
Right, yeah.
Most people need a team of people to build a house, and you need a bunch of materials. You need people to do things at a certain order. You need to have people that do things according to a plan. You need to have people that do things well. You don't want your house to fall down.
Yeah, exactly. You want them to be skilled at what they do.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot of skills and materials, but there's leadership. Somebody has got to be there saying, okay, this has to happen next. And, the bricks need to have been ordered and be delivered. And, all of the things need to happen. But somebody has to be kind of that leading, directing mind to make that happen. And it's the same with, huge projects. And it's versus very small projects, getting the supper on the table at night.
Yeah, there's a lot of little steps that you just have to go through. Yeah.
But you have to keep always be thinking about, how do we want things to look in the future? So, I mean, from a big social level right down to, your own little life and making everything happen that needs to happen in a day.
Yeah. And I think that's I love that you're teaching the students that, and I know you kind of in another way taught a lot of us that. I mean, Tom wanted me to bring up when he found out that you were coming on, wanted me to bring up that my class and his class was obviously your favorite, but you don't have to say that because I know you can't. It's like children, you can't pick a favorite class, but
You're all my favorites.
Exactly. But one of the things that I just love about my time at the LLC was that time of focusing on the prime ministers, right? And that's leadership. So going back to what you're saying is they're such interesting people, the people who lead countries. There's a reason we're kind of obsessed with them because you don't get there by accident. Maybe a few of them did. The four pallbearers, maybe one or two of them was an accident. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on, because every year you study the prime ministers again, right? And you hear a new take from students. So really, you've built up this wealth of knowledge yourself of Canadian prime ministers. What do you think it takes to become a prime minister?
Well, it's interesting because each semester we develop kind of each class develops its own rubric of how to evaluate prime ministerial leadership. So I get to hear what they think is going to make a good prime minister. What are the absolutely essential skills? And then we go through and evaluate the prime ministers based on those things. But it's interesting over time. I think students do have, they have changed somewhat. Our evaluation of Sir John A. Macdonald has changed really dramatically.
I imagine.
Yes. Yeah. Back 15 years ago, people were much more concerned about the fact that Macdonald was an alcoholic and had drunken binges from time to time. And now people are much more concerned about his racism and how he treated First Nations. So, the fact that he was a binge drinker, well, lots of people are binge drinkers now.
Right, true.
It wasn't socially acceptable 15 years ago. but nobody particularly cared 15 years ago. Well, some people did, but it wasn't a big societal issue of how Macdonald treated First Nations at that time. So what does it take to be a good prime minister? It really does take some vision. It takes, I mean, we're actually covering this week, we're going to be covering Louis Saint-Laurent. And Louis Saint-Laurent, hardly anybody knows who he was because he was just a good, competent leader.
Right.
He didn't have a lot of charisma, but he got things done. He had a vision for, getting us past the Second World War and all the debt, and we had to restructure the economy. And, it was some pretty challenging times, but he was just very competent, brought in a lot of competent people to be rebuilding the economy. And so he was really a very successful prime minister without being particularly flashy, where I think most of us think you've got to have some charisma, you've got to have public speaking skills. And maybe that's because our current prime minister does have those things, and he plays very much to those strengths. But Stephen Harper did not have a huge amount of charisma and still was a very competent prime minister because he had, an economics education background and got us through a very difficult economic time period.
Yeah, and did it really well. Canada was in great shape in 2015 when he handed over the keys, right?
Yeah.
Now, I like that. What do you, when you look at students and like people generally who go to the LLC want to be leaders, right? Like that's generally the people who go there. It is called the Laurentian Leadership Centre, right? So like, what do you see so you see these fresh-faced, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, coming out of university, the whole world is their oyster. What do you think is the quality that makes someone want to be a leader?
I think, a lot of the people that I see come to this program are people who want to make a positive difference in the world. And so they want to be leaders because they want to make things better. Now, they have all kinds of different ideas about what that looks like.
Yeah, I remember Caleb Ratzlaff and I just going at it again and again. Remember, in every class, it was like the socialists are coming versus the conservatives, and it was just war. I loved it.
Yeah. So I mean, I do continue to get students from a wide diversity of political views. I get a lot of students who are very concerned about the environment. I get a lot of students concerned about human trafficking. I get a lot of students interested in First Nations reconciliation, a lot of students interested in international development. And all of these, I think, are really valuable, and we need them in our society. And I think that's a driving force for leadership, though, is you have to see that things can change, that you can do something, that actions that you take can improve things, can make a difference.
Yeah.
And go out and do their leadership in a lot of different ways. So we have a lot of alumni from my program who have gone on to be lawyers.
Yes.
And they're doing various legal things. Some work in governments, federally, provincially, in other countries. We have a number that are doing international development in different places. But we also have some farmers and some community development workers. So
even a podcast host.
And several have written books, including your friend Tom Hunt.
Exactly, he's got two. He's working on his third right now. Yeah. So
there are a lot of ways that you can make the world a better place. And I appreciate the diversity of students. And I also appreciate the fact that people can go at each other.
Yeah.
They can have disagreements. Because one of the things I think we're missing in our society is the ability to disagree publicly, because I think that's how you get to better solutions.
Yeah. Well, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another, right? Like without stay uncomfortable. If you're too comfortable, then you're not going to change. You need to be challenged to become strong, right? Like,
absolutely. And we don't want to be living in our own little echo chambers. We need to get ideas from a variety of different sources and allow those ideas to compete out there in the marketplace of ideas. And that's how the best ideas get some airtime and can actually come into force, come into play.
So going back to leadership and changing the world for a better place, what role do you think ambition plays in people wanting to be a leader?
Well, it's interesting. We as you go through the prime ministers, starting in 1867, there's several of them in a row who took on leadership reluctantly. And some of those are some of our best leaders. Unfortunately, some of the people who seek out leadership for leadership's sake don't end up being the best leaders because it's about them as opposed to about serving others. And leadership has a huge, the best leaders are either leaders because they see something that needs to be done and they go out and do it, or they have a real service mentality and they want to serve others and make the world a better place.
Yeah.
But those who seek out leadership for leadership's sake, because of their own egos or because they want to, have their name up in lights, I don't think that they're there for themselves as opposed to there for other people. And I think the best leaders are there for serving other people and serving their communities. So,
yes.
Ambition can be a good thing, but only if it's there for good purposes.
Yeah. Well, I think about when I got to the LLC, I was incredibly ambitious, and I feel like I always kind of have been. But I've realized, I guess, even over just the last couple of years, that just like you said, leadership for leadership's sake is garbage. And I actually will use the Conservative Party's campaign in the 2019 election as an example of this. I often say that the problem with modern politics is polling and focus groups. And the reason for that is because they're just trying to find out what people want and what they think so that they can get ahead of that parade and, manipulate them through propaganda and messaging and all that kind of stuff to say, hey, this thing that you love, we'll make it better. Or, hey, this thing you're scared of, we'll keep it away. And that's modern politics in a nutshell. Well, that's not leadership. Right? And so when the Conservatives came up with a slogan, it's time for you to get ahead, that's exactly how everyone was feeling. It was dead on. It was great focus group, great polling research. But the problem is, that's not leadership. Leadership is saying, hey, here's a problem. This is how we're going to fix it. Hey, you see that place over there? The land flowing with milk and honey? That's where we're going to go. Right? And what's shocked me is we seem to have lost that kind of leadership in Canada. I can't remember I will give Trudeau this. Here's a kudos that I can give, since I've been accused of being too partisan. He at least is saying we're going somewhere. Right? He's saying green transition. These are the things that we want Canada to be. And that's, I think, why people love him, right? And that's why he's still so popular. Is they're like, he's just maybe he's a little bit of a buffoon sometimes, but we like where he's leading us.
People want to have a vision set out for them. And I have seen that during election campaigns. There's always a tendency for leaders of opposition parties to spend most of their time trying to throw mud at whoever is prime minister at the time. Yeah. And they
certainly did it to Harper. That was all they did.
And what you see from the general public is we don't want the mud. We want to know what you're going to do. What's your vision? If you're elected, you get to be prime minister. Where are you going to take us?
Yeah. And that's what I like. There's a lot of things I don't like about Obama, and a lot of the people listening to this don't like Obama. But I will say this: hope and change is a great, great slogan for a leader, right? Hope. That's what a leader is. It's a dealer in hope, right? And change, well, change isn't always good. So, but when you say hope and change, you've taken the change and said, well, it's going to be change for the better.
Yes.
And that people love that idea.
Yep.
That's leadership in my mind, and I think that's what I didn't get when I was at the LLC. Is I was still about, oh, how can I make my resume better? How can I prove to the world that I am who I feel like I am in my heart, right? Well, that should never have been the intention, and that was the problem. That, like you said, that's the ego. That's leadership for leadership's sake. It's actually leadership to fill the void of insecurity. Like, this is the thing that I've noticed about a lot of politicians and leaders in general. They almost always have a chip on their shoulder, and it's because they're trying to fill a void of meaning with validation, with external validation. And I think, and I'd like your thoughts on if you know any prime ministers that really resemble this. I think most of them do. I think to truly become a leader, you have to have an internal locus of control.
Yeah, I think you're right that certainly to be a good, strong leader, you need to know who you are and live in accordance with who you are and what you believe. Because when you get to be the leader of a country, everybody is trying to get a piece of you, trying to get you to do, their little thing, little issue. A lot of people are going to be coming at you, criticizing you, trying to take you down. So you have to have a very strong core of who am I and what do I believe and why am I doing what I'm doing? And quite honestly, I think, naked ambition is not going to get you through.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah, and you're going to be swept off course unless you have that real strength of who you are and what you believe. And there are certainly prime ministers that we can look at who knew that, and Louis Saint Laurent is one. I think Pierre Elliott Trudeau is one.
He was definitely one. There's no question. He knew exactly who he was.
Yeah, who he was and where he was going. And if you didn't like it, well,
yeah, that's too bad for you.
Too bad for you.
Just watch me.
Exactly. So he was, and often those kinds of people can be very polarizing. They don't have to be, though. They can just say, well, I actually think MacDonald, Sir John A. Macdonald, and Sir Wilfrid Laurier were both like that as well.
Right.
They both very much knew who they were and where they wanted to take the country. And no doubt they faced people who criticized them and criticized their ideas, but they stood firm to that and they weren't swayed by people and public opinion. Yeah.
No, you know that Theodore Roosevelt quote, it's not the critic that counts. That whole, it's the man in the arena, who's,
right.
I've always thought that you can't be the man in the arena. It's easy to be a critic. And I think of like all of the people who watch sports and they all have an opinion about these like amazing athletes. They're like, oh, he sucks, right? Well, why don't you go play hockey with him, right? and see how well you do on the ice, right? But more than that, it's like, it's easy to be a critic. Anyone can do it. But doing things, that's hard.
It's very hard. You're going to run into obstacles. Things are not going to go the way you plan. There are going to be unintended consequences. You're going to be sideswiped by things. So it is very hard to take a leadership position. And particularly when you're in a crisis situation, it's very hard to know what to do because you don't know what's coming next.
Yeah. And you're going to, like you said, there's all these people out there just ready to take your head at the first sign of a stumble. So you're aware of that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think only too well aware of the fact that you're going to be yesterday's news. One day it's all going to be over.
Yeah.
And it's just a question of when that is going to come.
Yeah, exactly. I think I've been reading a lot of Roman history, particularly the fall of the Republic, because I basically think history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. And we're looking at it rhyming right now, I think, particularly in America. And the question that's being asked kind of on the international stage through Ditchley and other groups like that is, well, how do we preserve the freedoms and the values that we've held as the West, right? Like the good ones, like the rule of law and, democracy, freedom, these kind of things. And I can't help but think that Canada could play a big role in that. So as we're closing, I've only got 4 more minutes here. What do you think Canada could become? I mean, you've been studying this country very intensely with a fresh set of eyes. You basically have had a perfect focus group for 15 years, twice a year. So 30 focus groups on leadership, on Canada. What do you think we could become?
Well, I think that we can and should be a champion for democracy. We traditionally have liked to think of ourselves as the honest broker, middle power, and we really need to make sure that we occupy that territory. Different prime ministers have had different ideas about how we do that, but I think we should continue to try to do that as we're looking at shifts in the tectonic plates amongst countries, sometimes literally in the world, but we're seeing some very significant global shifts with the rise in the influence of China, and I think Canada needs to be very careful about how it navigates that and not be seen to be in anybody's camp, but to be with the group of countries that are championing freedom and democracy and the rule of law, because they're incredibly important. That's why you see so many people wanting to flock to this country and immigrate here. And I think it's one of the great things about Canada. We need to make sure we preserve it.
I utterly agree. I've got this. Well, one of these days I'm going to do a podcast where I tell what I think the Canadian story should be. But I gotta say, always a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope that more people understand the beauty of what you're doing. But thank you for your insights, like sharing the wisdom that you've gleaned from your career with us. I really appreciate that.
Great. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Always a pleasure to talk about students and prime ministers and where we're going as a country.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.